Welcome to Why Are You Awake? Paul Farahvar here, your host. This week we have comedian Vik Pandya. Go check him out. Check us out as well. If you're listening to this podcast, go over to the YouTube page, youtube.com/paulfcomedy, and watch us. Also, check out my website, paulfcomedy, for upcoming dates. Follow me on Instagram as well. And most importantly, check out our sponsors. You love sex. Everyone does. Have you ever used sex toys? Ever wanted to? Or you just feel weird about the whole thing? Well, Love Shop Toys has been in the business of destigmatizing sex toys for years, 20 years. You want a sex toy? Go to loveshoptoys.com and check out their huge variety of options. Whether you're straight, gay, trans, whatever you're into, Love Shop Toys has something for you. And if you're uncomfortable about it, guess what? They send things discreetly so no one has to know about whatever you're into. And even if you're not very active in the sex toy business, check it out. loveshoptoys.com. They send you everything, and it's free shipping for everything over $69. In addition to the free shipping, if you use the code AWAKE69, you get 20% off your whole purchase. That's right, AWAKE69. Go to loveshoptoys.com/awake69 right now and get your stuff. Get your toys. Have some fun. You're welcome. As some of you know, I used to be a practicing lawyer in Chicago. I no longer practice, but from time to time, I need a lawyer. And when I need a lawyer, I call my friend Scott Shapiro. Scott Shapiro has been practicing law for over 25 years in Chicago. He does it all, from workers' compensation to personal injury, employment issues, and even entertainment law and contract needs. If you need a lawyer, call my friend Scott. 312-648-8800. That's 312-648-8800. Or you can email him at scott@scottshapirolegal.com. Tell him I sent you. You're welcome. Hey, why are you awake? Paul Farahvar here. This week we have a very funny comedian, Vik Pandya. Hey, Vik.
Hey, what's up, man?
Nothing at all.
I like how you did that. You open, you're like, why are you awake? Like, hey, like it's someone's
Wake
like
up.
watching. Like, wake up. It startled me a little bit.
Well, people say that my voice is too soothing. They listen to the podcast, even with singles only. They're like, I like listening to it when I go to sleep because then I just fall asleep to your voice. I'm like, I don't know if I like that.
It's a compliment for what I do. Yeah.
I was like, usually the best parts are at the end of that podcast. Is when it gets comfortable. People are like start revealing shit, and then they're like, oh, you got to take it down, like a singles only podcast. So
yeah.
But this is different. Vik Pandya, we've been doing comedy together for almost 10 years.
I know. It's and we're still here, you know?
Yeah.
That's
Well, now we're not here as often. And I was trying to talk to you before, and I was trying to remember when I first met you, and you didn't remember.
I don't remember, so I'm very excited to hear this story.
So it wasn't a good first impression, I'll tell you that right now. I want to start with that. I feel like it's like, remember the old WTFs with Mark Maron? He would just go on and just like
trash people.
Yeah, I'd be like, remember that time? Like, it's a positive ending.
Yeah,
but the first time we went there, we worked at Zany's in Old Town. You were hosting a show. I don't remember who was headlining, but I think I was featuring. Well, I definitely wasn't headlining. And Bert Haas was there. He was talking you up. He's like, oh, you're going to love this guy. And I was like, okay, who's this guy? And the headliner was not, it was, I wish I remember who it was. It wasn't like,
was it like a weekday? It probably was like just a local or like someone like not like a
it wasn't a weekend. It was a one-nighter.
Okay.
And this is like 10 years ago, probably, or close to 10 years ago. And I saw that you knew a lot of people in the audience. I was like, oh, this guy's just a fucking bringer. Yeah, and I was like, he's just
new at comedy.
He's new at comedy. You're wearing a suit and you're like all dolled up. Everyone in the crowd was like these young girls that were attractive. And I was like, this guy's a fucking douche. And I was like, who is this guy? And I was like, and you were leaning into Naperville and ethnicity stuff. And it was like when I was doing, obviously I was too. And I was like, oh, he's doing all my fucking material. Not that it was just similar. I was like, this is going to suck. As
every brown comedian starts.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, this guy is going to suck. And then after the show, you did fine. It wasn't like it was hosting. You were like probably a year in.
Yeah.
And I was like, how did this guy fucking get into Bert's like good graces? And then I was like, oh, well, he's like clean. He's like well dressed and he brings people. And I was like, this guy's not funny. And you did okay. It wasn't like, everyone did okay. It was a fucking weekday show. And I was just like, oh. And then every time I'd see you after that, I was like, oh, this guy's a fucking bringer. That's all it was. That's what I thought you were. And then
I wonder what show that is, 'cause I don't remember specifically bringing people. I guess I must have been hyped for Zanies. Like I was probably.
It was one of your first. I remember you did.
Yeah,
say
I
it was
must
your
have been
first time.
like first time like hosting or something. It must have been some milestone. You know.
It was. There were a lot of people that came there to see. I just remember there were like groups of women, very attractive, and I was like this. And you were so dressed up. I just pictured you as this like
straight out of LinkedIn. You know.
I pictured you as like a guy who just straight out of River North. Like you just came from the clubs.
There was a period.
And then you were going right to the clubs after the show. I was like this guy, and then I remember. And then I was like, I don't like him. And I just, for some reason, I didn't like you because I was like, oh, you're doing a lot of the same stuff I'm doing, but not as good because you were newer.
Sure.
And I was like threatened. I'm like, this guy's, and he's bringing people.
Yeah. So he's doing it worse, but he's also bringing. So there is that element. Yeah.
So I was like, oh,
because you know, all these clubs, like, well, he brought 10 people.
Right.
Give him 5 minutes.
And then we worked together. We weren't really close, but then I remember, and we'll talk about this more later in the podcast, but I remember after the pandemic, and I've said this on the podcast with Tyler too, you and Tyler came out the pandemic just guns a-blazing. You guys were crushing it. And I remember every time you guys were on a show, you guys were murdering. And it was like people that were talking shit about like me. I'd include myself in that, not darlings of the comedy scene back then.
Yeah.
And you guys were like, fuck you guys, we're good, and this is why. And you just murdered every shows. And I was like, I remember talking about it. Someone was like saying like, who's good now? And I was like, these guys fucking killed. We were doing like a show at like Comedy Bar or something. I was like, you guys murdered, and everybody else did not do well because they were rusty, and you guys fucking crushed. So
thank you.
I was like, you guys come a long way from that douchey asshole that brought 10 hot
you
chicks.
you gotta find your voice. Now I bring people who are just stay at home all day. It's like a very different fan base now.
Yeah.
I feel like.
What is your fan base? You get a lot of Indians that come out.
I
to
do
your
get
shows.
a lot of Indians. It's more diverse than just Indian people now, which I think is great. Like I think when I started, I was doing a lot of like. You lean on the material that's close to you, but now the material has transitioned more into like it is still a lot of racial stuff, but it's not just like about me. It's just about this topic as a whole. Yeah. So I think because of that, my fan base has expanded, and it is also like a lot of like punching down, which I think people
What do you mean?
Like
punching down.
Well, I feel like a lot of my comedy is like punching down, but then I'm also self-deprecating, so it kind of like lets me get away with it. But when I started, it was a lot of just like. You got to feel bad for me because of this. And then I would do it. Now I go the other way. I kind of punch down first, but then I'm like self-deprecating because I have the skill now to do it. But I feel like because of that, it gets people who kind of like not people who, it's not like edgelord stuff anymore, but it is people who are like, I need to follow this joke to get the release. Yeah. But it is that tension and release. And
you do. I noticed a couple shows we've done together recently that you do kind of alienate the crowd, dig yourself into a hole, and then you get yourself out of it.
And that's like a lot of the new stuff that I'm playing with is some of my favorite jokes are like that because it is this like, well, he's on the wrong side of this, but then it will come out that I'm not.
Right.
Or like that it'll be a release. And that's like, it's more fun. It's like higher stakes, Because if you're just topical, observational the whole time, it's kind of boring.
Yeah.
Like, you can go in and
I like when you said that and you pointed to me like, if you're doing boring shit like
we both have dry bars. So, we know how to do it. We know how to do it. And there's a time
dry
and
bar
place for
comedy
that.
is like super clean Mormon comedy.
And you need to have that, especially starting out, you need to have that middle of the road stuff because otherwise that's how you get booked at Zanies. That's how you get booked in the host spot. People now are like, this is my voice 1 year in. It's like, first of all, it's going to change.
A lot.
And if you don't have the mentality of like, I'm trying to appeal to everybody, I think early on, you're not going to get booked as much. And you're going to be I feel like it's better to kind of like cast a wide net.
Yeah.
See what's kind of hitting. Starting. And then you start to narrow your focus. And now I feel like I have a better voice. But I haven't hit 10 years yet, but I think I still am finding what that is.
Yeah. We all are.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it is too, and I've talked about this before, where it's like you do appeal at some point when you're appealing too broadly and you're casting a wider net, you don't get those super fans, right?
No, you don't, and you come across
what you
as and that problem with that is then people are like, well, you're not saying anything.
Yeah.
And then people don't want to come to see you unless they're like very specific audiences that are want to see that no nonsense, like clean comedy down the line. But that's not what I mean. I was trying to do stuff like early on that I was like, this is my joke now. I'm like, this is my joke. I had very specific things. I'm like, that's the voice that I'm going to do. But now when you're new, you have less jokes. So you just think that's like your new thing now.
Who were you mimicking when you started? Like for me, when I started, I was darker and I wanted to be like Anthony Jeselnik. If you go to my first year, it was like just shock value, stupid shit.
I think it was a little bit of, I got really
Hassan
into
Minaj.
Not even, he wasn't big then though. He was like just starting, and which is crazy to think about his rise in the last 9-10 years, right? All these people are like, they're famous now, but when they were just getting their start on like the Daily Show or whatever these shows were, I really liked people from that show. Like I looked up to like Michelle Wolf, Roy Wood Jr., and I got to work with both of those people, which is incredible. But those are two people I really liked, but they were also still only if you watched the show you knew who they were, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And now they're mainstream. But I also like Patrice O'Neal is my favorite comedian of all time.
Okay.
But he was so extreme in some ways that I knew even starting, I was like, well, I can't go here yet.
Right.
But I can try to like see the things I can take from him now. And it was like honesty. It was being yourself. Like those are things that when you start, you're kind of you're doing what people think is funny, or you think people think is funny, but it's not really always like what I want to say.
Well, also you were smart enough to know that you couldn't pull off Patrice, whereas I think a lot of the younger people now, when you're talking about edgelords, they're all doing, Tony Hinchcliffe and the most like edgy shit, and like you don't have the jokes to back it up.
No, I mean, even there's certain jokes that like a couple years ago, I even like coming out of the pandemic, like you're saying, we're coming out with these like, because we were doing shows during the pandemic, doing Zoom shows, doing weird like crazy shit.
I was going to fucking red states and performing.
Yeah, but that's why you kept it up, and it was almost like going back to open micing for a year because you're doing worse, tougher rooms. So when you come back out and start doing clubs again, you're like, oh, this is I'm murdering, because it's like it's normal. It's like it's set up for comedy, right? But you basically like, I think for me it was a lot of like, I knew early on that these are jokes that I can't get away with, but I'll shelf them, or I'll shelf the idea and I'll come back to this at some point. And there's some of those I've like started doing again, or like tried it again, and now I have more skill or I can put it somewhere. Because I don't like to throw anything out. I think it's like you always go back. And now I just released my last special, so now I'm mining to jokes from 10 years ago. That I'm like, oh, I can. This premise now is still. I could do this. Yeah, this is great. Yeah, and it's a lot of those. When you start, at least for me, when I started, I would write a lot, but I would use only like one or two lines. Yeah. So I have all this like stuff that's old. It's just pages, and now I don't even write like that really. But it's just funny because I was like, oh, this is like 2 pages of material. It's like 2 lines that I use from the page. Right. But there is still some other shit in there that I could develop into a premise maybe, or go back. Or a line you could put in a different joke. Line, and I need to be better. Like I used to set like every few months I'd go back and do that. But now I just am like, I mean, I don't know. How about you? Do you listen to every set? I do, yeah. I do. I'm really good about listening. But how do you said that's not how you write. How do you write now? So now it's a lot more, I think, because I'm more comfortable, because I've had the hosting tenure, and now I'm starting to close more regularly. Like I have the time to fuck around, and so I'll do at different points in my act, I'll start doing a bunch of new stuff. After I've earned their trust, or like done 30 minutes of jokes, I'll do like 8-10 minutes of new stuff, maybe at the end of a headlining set. So with that in mind, is it written already? Or it's like it's a mix of both. So it's a lot of like, this one is maybe I've written it, but this one's just an idea, and I'll talk through it. Because sometimes it's like, I don't know how to write it, but I know the idea is something good in it. So I'm like, let me just try talking through it. And if I'm already like warmed up and on stage for 30 minutes or so, I feel like it'll come out how it's supposed to come out. And that I'll do that process maybe 3 or 4 times, and then I'll listen and write that part out. So like but it will build on its own naturally. And you just record it and listen. I just record it and listen to it, and usually I listen to like the final iteration. Like I don't, because I just am bad about it, but I'm getting better about listening more often. But it is like, it's a lot more of like writing on stage now, and that is really fun. But I still like, there's something satisfying about sitting down and just writing a joke out, and then knowing, I think at this point, I'm like, that's going to work. Yeah. Like sometimes I can look at it, I'm like, that's done. Really? A couple times. Not a lot. but it happens sometimes.
Yeah, I can't write like that. I've tried, and tonight I did a couple new things. Cause I was like, fuck it. I was doing a show we talked about earlier where it was like, oh, these are all comics that I don't know, and I'm hosting. So as soon as I tried some stuff, and I was just like, what I do is I have an outline of a premise, and I just go up on stage after I've earned their trust, like you do, and I know that in the pressure point where I don't have a laugh, I can get out of it. I'll come up with something funny.
The pressure is so...
That's what gets me to write the endings.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's always a placeholder, but sometimes a placeholder holds forever.
Yeah, and it is.
But I can't write it out before.
The audience doesn't know that you don't know the end. So there is this like fun thing where if you pause an extra second, sometimes like that extra second will prompt a response.
You have to, because you're trained, because you need a laugh.
Yeah, and it's like that natural thing if the audience is like expecting the punchline, and then either you figure it out or they give you some other noise that you're like, there's something there I can work with. So I do that a lot too, where I'm like, I'll go on stage, say it's a 10-minute set or 15-minute set. I'll have 4 or 5 jokes, maybe 5 or 7 minutes, and then the rest I'll just like kind of figure out. Like, I don't know what I mean. I'll use other jokes I've already written, but I might not know the order, or I might not know, just because that will force my brain to like connect things differently
later. Later in the set.
Later in the set, or I'll just like go into the crowd or do something, and because after like you do 4 or 5 shows, if you're doing like 45 minutes an hour, you're back-to-back headlining sets. By the last show, you're like, I'm tired of everything I'm doing.
The last show Saturday after a weekend of shows is usually the most fun, because you're just like, I don't.
And you're
give a
so
fuck anymore.
on, and you're so. And then I wish I could like have a button where I could turn on that I don't give a fuck before any show, just to be like, sometimes shows need it, you know.
Phase that we're at now, at least for me, is you don't get to enjoy the show, because up until the show, all you're worried about is like, fuck, is it going to be crowded?
Well, I'm in an interesting spot too, because similarly, like some markets that I have no, like, I know the few that I do well in, or the ones that I'm like, this one's going to be a lock because it's a natural draw or whatever, which is nice. So a lot of the places,
cities are like, they'll put your YouTube online, and then people do their research and like, I'll go see that.
And it's great, and that's the best.
Those are the best.
People have done some research,
unless they saw your dry bar and they're like, oh, we thought you. Have you ever had that? People
I've had a couple people. It happens more so in like conservative states where dry bar tends to move. We
saw your dry bar,
and then I usually address it, because not everything I do is dirty, but like it depends what the show is. Sometimes like a late show, I might come out in a different way, and I'm like. And I can sense if some people have seen it, and I'm like, I have some stuff for you too. You know, like wait, it's pretty fun.
I'm not super dirty, but I do have people that have come up to me after my drive, like, especially right after the drive.
That wasn't what I expected.
But like, it was still good, but they're like definitely disappointed. They're not coming back.
And I think there's enough, like, if you go on my like Instagram, because I think most people now go on, they don't go like just on YouTube. People go to like your social, and then you and I have so many clips that like you watch 3, you're like, oh, I get, it's not just clean, you know, and I think that's what's important about.
Well, the younger people do, but my crowd's older, so it's like sometimes I'm doing a show and like
they're like, we saw this on MySpace, and you're like, Jesus,
like 55 and over is my fucking fan base.
But I will say, going back to the, you go to the city, you don't know what the draw is. I feel a weird. I'm sure you feel this too. Sense, and it's a good thing, and I've actually been trying to tap into this as well. Of like, we talk about not giving a fuck. There's also a inverse pressure of like, I need the show to be good, because the 20 people or 40 people that are here, I need them to walk away being like a fan for life. And I feel like they're coming to this. It's embarrassing already that I didn't fill it. So now I feel like a fire is lit under me, and I refuse to bomb.
Put on a great show.
That's what it is. My girlfriend tells me. She's like, there's like 5 comedians she's like that I know of, and she's like, you're one of the people that refuses to bomb. Like, and obviously I will still do it, like whatever, but like full on, bomb, like how we talk about it, like when we started. And she's like, you will figure it out and you will do it. And I think that kind of pressure, especially closing, because you're like, you go on the road, some of these openers you don't know, they pair you with people who are really bad, and they just don't know how to like manage a show. Like, we're so lucky in Chicago, we have competent people, but half the time on the road you get paired with someone, it's just the first 30 minutes of show is bad, and then you go up and you're like, well, this is people who are paying to see me,
and they think that you were with them.
Yes.
Are you guys touring together? Like, no, I don't even know that guy.
And it's like, it's a fine line, because you can't shit on them completely, but you have to
it's a risk.
Very quickly delineate yourself.
Right. I remember my camera died on a show that like I did recently, where everyone was eating it before me, and I just went up. I'm like, I need to come in with something totally different.
Yes.
And the first minute, I just addressed the elephant in the room. There was like people that came in late, all the like black people are sitting on one side, all the white people are sitting. I'm like, what's going on in Indiana? And it just fucking, we were off to the races.
Yeah.
And it was like putting on a clinic. I felt like, I was like, okay. And then the camera.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things that you're just like, I know this happened.
Let's take a step back here. So you started comedy after you had a career in tech.
I worked in finance and then I worked in HR.
Oh,
so
why did I say tech? That's just racist.
Well, it was tech companies in HR.
That's right. Okay.
So kind of racist, but still. But it was. But
well, I knew you did.
Well, Tyler and I actually worked at a startup together.
Okay.
But we had met during improv and stuff, and then we worked at the startup together. And our thought was joining the startup. We're like, oh, we'll be able to like do more comedy because it's a flexible schedule, remote work, and this is before the pandemic. So only companies that were offering remote work were startups. So our idea was like, oh yeah, we'll do this. We'll have a more flexible schedule. And quickly, I was like the head of HR at the entire company. So
How big was this company?
I mean, it was like 20 people.
Okay.
But if you're doing the head of HR, that means you're recruiting, you're doing compliance,
Sure.
you're doing like legal, you're doing all this shit. So it's not just like one function of HR. So I was all very busy, but I was also doing stand-up every day. It was crazy. I was just working all the time and doing stand-up. And so I was so like executional. I was just so like on all the time, but I wasn't able to like reflect and like sit down. And like now I feel like my bits are so much more like, it's just so much, I have so much more time to like marinate in the bits. You know?
You also, what I respect about what you guys do is that you treat this as a job. And like it is a job. And so it's not like you're not going to hang out. And it was like, okay, no, you're here to fucking work.
And honestly, I couldn't because I was like, I realized like I did hang a few times, but then you're like, I have to go to work.
Yeah,
I have to go into my
way.
job. You know, and the nice thing was having both is I think when you start comedy, it's such a different world. It's such a different environment. And especially coming from like a professional setting. So it's exciting and you want to be part of that.
Don't put mine. I had
yeah, you got some degree.
I was a lawyer. Let's not, you're fucking
way,
HR. Did you even graduate from college with that? Like don't put us in the same.
You do have all your other podcasts on the wall, which is pretty.
In case people forget.
Yeah. But like,
yeah, I know
you're just so used to this environment. So you're like, oh, this is crazy. This is bars and like, it's just it's such a different, and I had never been in that environment really. So
what do you mean you were never in that environment?
Well, I mean, even in college, like that's what's interesting to me. I went to school at DePaul. So when you were saying about the suits and stuff, what was very funny is like when you start school, you're going to school in a city, which is a different experience than going to school in like a rural town, right? So you start going out when you're a sophomore or whatever, and you're going to like the dive bars like Lincoln Park, right? But then by the time you hit senior year, you've done the whole circuit of shitty bars, right? Mm-hmm. Which is typically where like open mics are at, right? So by the time you're a senior, you're like, I'm going to clubs now. I'm a business intern. I got my little suit separate from Macy's. I'm going to River North. I'm a club guy now. But I wasn't even then I was kind of phasing out of that too, because that's a very short, like either in it or, but it's not a sustainable thing. So when I started doing comedy, I was very happy to have one foot in the corporate world and tethered because it kept me, to your point, just treating it like a job. Yeah. I never fully immersed myself in the sense of like all the other things. I fully immersed myself in the comedy of the stand-up, but I also was like, I have obligations. I have to make money. Right. I have to do these things. So that a duality, like I always say, we're like 1 foot in, 1 foot out, of the scene. And now I feel fully in the scene, but now that I'm touring, I need a little bit of separation. Yeah. And I think it's nice to be like, yeah, I'm in town, most 4 days a week.
Right.
But then I'm not part of the drama. I'm not existing.
I never know what's going on.
I never know what's going on, and I'm happy to not know what's going on. Yeah. It's great.
Until people, you book someone on a show and then people yell at you. You're like, oh, I didn't even know.
Like,
what did he do?
You got to be aware of like certain broader things. Or whatever.
Tonight where I was at Zany's, I just went up to the manager. I'm like, hey, so like what happened? I've been gone for anyone get canceled? Jokingly, but also seriously
because it is a thing. Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm booking a show at the Laugh Factory every week, and I'm like, I want to reach out to people. I'm like, but I haven't talked to this person.
Especially when it's one of those shows where like I'm trying to give people an opportunity, like a newer comment. Same thing. Comedy Bar. I have the same thing.
We have the same night of a show. So a lot of the people that come to my show have seen the show, so I don't want to have the same guests.
So you're struggling to find new people every week.
And then also the booker also books guests sometimes. I'm like, wait, don't book people I don't know because I have to talk to them. Yeah. And I don't want to talk to someone that just fucking bombed.
Yeah, yeah. That's also.
They don't want to talk to me either.
It is very funny in stand-up how we
both have a show where it's like we interview people after this.
Yeah, which is literally like half the show is us doing this. So you need to actually like them a little bit. Or like find them interesting.
Or have something to talk about.
But I love in comedy for me too, like I feel like when I meet someone new, a new comic I don't know, there is an element of like, let's see them go up first.
Yeah.
See if they're funny before I fully invest.
Yeah.
But then there's some people who are just so like, you can tell they're like a good person. So you're like, oh, they're going to be a good person, but I still need to see if you're funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so happy we started like it was such a weird thing of people now where it's like, it's trying to get a clip. Or I'm like, I didn't post anything for 5 years.
I posted my
3
first big set. And I remember I shared it with everybody, and now it's like cringingly bad.
Oh,
it's so
you're excited. You're like, this is the one.
It's
this is
so bad. And now I have a friend who just started comedy too, and he's posting his clips. I'm like, you're gonna regret this.
When I started, Tyler and I were running these. We were 3-4 months in, 5 months in, producing these shows with 200 people, 150 people, which is when you're that new and you're doing open mics and then you do a show for 200 people.
Oh, we had 600 people. Yeah.
You're like, I'm the greatest comedian of all time. It gives you a weird sense of, but you're still tethered because you're like, I'm also bombing at open mics, but I'm doing this crazy show. So obviously the show keeps you going for like a month, right? But it also gives you a little bit of a inflated sense because you're like, all my friends are coming to the show. It's a weird thing because I remember inviting people and I like look back at some of those sets and I was like, I thought I was like so good. And then there was that weird period after that first year of comedy where there's that dip. People like stop, like people came. They've seen it.
Stop coming.
And now you're like, now there's a few years of you just actually doing comedy and doing shows and and then you're like, oh, okay. Now I know where I stand, you know?
Well, that's they left because they was not good.
Yeah.
That's what you realize later in life. And I've had people come up and see me.
And there's like
now.
obligatory like 1 or 2 support times.
Yeah.
And some people don't even do that. They're like, no, I'll wait till you do
till
some
you're
real
good,
shit.
which is good. They should have done that.
I would do. I wouldn't support anybody I know. All the guys and girls we would book to close, like now it's like it's cool to do shows with them, and you get to that point and you're like, oh, you used to close all of our shows, like we have Danny Callis,
Danny and Marty,
all those people, and like and now it's like fun to be like, oh, we're doing shows together now,
right?
And then it's like now we're getting asked to close,
right?
You know, which is just fun, but it's like it is a cool full circle moment in comedy. You're like, but that's to your point. It's so smart to bookend the shows. Like you got a strong host, strong closer, and then you're like, I can do some weird shit. I could do my little 8 minutes in the middle.
I liked hosting back then. I loved hosting because
I still like it.
I do too sometimes.
But it is when you're hosting a fun show like that. I think it's hard to host when you're hosting a show that's like tough. Mm-hmm. Then you feel like you're really doing work. But when you're hosting like your friends or like people that are excited to be there, like hosting that comedy bar show is very fun because the audience, it's my show, and I can tell people have done the research on me who are coming. And also because of the format of the show, and your show's the same way, there's a looseness to it where I can be even more like loose than I normally am. And I don't feel like this pressure to be, you know, like, oh, everything's got to hit. I'm like, I'm doing new shit up here. This is my show. I'm working out stuff. And I'm like, people after me are going to do sets, but I'm here to fuck around. And I kind of established that pretty quickly.
I treat it like a late night show. I feel like that's what it is. And we have some games and stuff like that, but mostly it's like.
Well, I'm also like, I was talking to someone about this, that like, what is my final, like, what do I want to do, right? What is the end goal? And I'm like, it would be great to have like a weekly show like that.
And you have to be able to, it's a skill set that most comedians, or now I shouldn't say most, but you have to be able to listen and be able to talk about things. Yeah. And you have to be so self-aware too, that you don't talk about things you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah.
Or if you don't, you have to be okay with, like, I love bringing people on talking about shit. I'm like, I don't know. Like M. Brown co-hosted with me, and they're talking about rap stuff. I'm like, I don't know who that is.
And then you become funny too, because you're like,
it's funny.
It's funny because the audience is like, there's people in the audience who also don't know.
Yeah.
So it's good for you to be like,
my
that
audience
person.
is 55 and over, so they're like, yeah, thank God Paul asked. But
I mean, now Taylor Tomlinson is doing her late night show, but I don't know. I still don't.
You mean
I don't
at midnight?
Yeah. But like, I haven't watched that. But it's like one of those things where I talk to people and a lot of people are like, I just don't make that jump to cable or whatever. Like, there's just people who just don't.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, how do you reach this medium when you're like, I'm trying to do this thing, but maybe the medium is outdated. I think about that sometimes.
I think most people, I mean, look at the stuff now that's happening in the world. People under 25 don't watch TV. They don't watch the news.
They watch TikTok.
They watch TikTok and they watch YouTube. And
imagine trying to create a talk show on TikTok. Yeah. Like, it's like a 20-second interview and it comes back.
1 minute. You have 1 minute, basically. Look at Kill Tony. He fucking destroys.
He figured it out. But see, that genius about that is it's a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, it is built for the social media. It's built for social media. And then they have the riffing portion, which people like. Yeah. So it is truly designed perfectly.
It's such a great
I think
concept.
I heard it's the number 2 podcast now. That's insane that many people. What I do respect about that is it is still comedy based. So people are getting aware of comedy.
It's doing great wonders for comedy, too.
And it's opening a lot of doors.
It's also hurting comedy. But
it's
whatever.
weird because it's hurting comedy because that's the type of comedy people are coming to expect.
Yeah.
At shows, which is a live show, is a very different experience, like a 45-minute, hour-long set.
Right.
We need you to sit and pay attention. We don't need you to like come in and like get roasted. Like it's not that type of show, you know? So I feel mixed ways about it. I think though it is still on your own brand. Like I think for me, I'll post a crowd work clip, but then the next clip I post is a joke.
Yeah.
I work with Martin Amini, who opens for Matt Rife, and now he's like touring globally on his own. He's blown up. He sold out the Improv in Schaumburg on a Thursday. He sold out 2 shows. It's like 700 tickets on a Thursday.
Wow.
Which is incredible. And the year before that, he was at like Laugh Factory. So just the growth in terms of 1 year. But he was saying, he's like, I blew up off crowd work clips, so people who watch me, but they're also not stand-up fans. They're people who only have consumed comedy through crowd work. Yeah. So they're like 18, 19, TikTok age. They come to a club, and he's trying to do stand-up, set up punchline jokes, but they don't understand stand-up. So he's like, I need to get this material special out, so then all these people who are my fans now see it on YouTube, my hour of material, and then they start to like understand that I'm also doing this. I'm also stubborn sometimes where I'm like, well, I'm also somebody. I shouldn't have to change my shit. But it's also like you got to be aware of like
depends on your situation.
Depends on your situation, but also depends on what you're doing on a show. Yeah. If you're hosting or if you're featuring,
right? And
if you're in service to the show, where if you're hosting, you're really in service to the show. You can't be like egotistical, or you can't even just be like, I'm not doing the job I was put in this place for.
Hosting is a different skill set where you have to the show. You can make or break a show.
Yeah, and I've had to deal with it featuring a couple times too, because I don't know if for you, I'm sure you've experienced this. I feel like it's harder to get feature work almost than headlining work sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes I think.
Like feature work is so last minute, and so sometimes if I get offered it, I'm already booked, so I have to turn it down. If I book headlining stuff, it's usually further out. So I hadn't featured in a while. I've been like just having a great like headlining run for like a couple months of stuff, and then I got asked to feature recently, and I was like, oh yeah, this is great, this is the best spot, don't have to sell tickets,
it's the best.
Gotta do a 20-25 minute set. I don't need to, these are not my crowd, I don't care necessarily, it's great, I can try some shit. But then I was approaching a feature set with like headliner energy, which is not, I'm like, they're not my crowd. Like I have to adapt a little bit. I have to adjust my set. I can't just come in, and it was a little bit like humbling because I'm like, oh fuck, I had to take a step back and be like,
they're not here
for me. And then I relearned it almost in a way. And Jim Flanagan gave me some great advice one time, because if you remember back in the day, I used to have this closer where I'd bring a guy on stage and I'd grind on the guy. Do you remember this?
I do vaguely remember
it was like the best joke I did. I was like, I've never had a funnier joke than this, and it would just destroy. But it was, I remember doing a feature set. Jim was hosting at Zany's. I was featuring.
Yeah, it's crowd. Yeah.
And I have a good set, and I close, and I bring the guy up. Yeah. And then Jim after the show was like, you can't do something the headliner's not going to be able to follow, because the headliner has to do an hour. You did 20, and you kind of started off you ended so hot that he has to because it's a build, right? Like the headliner set is a build. And even people who start hot, you have to carry that for so long.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I'm fucking up this person.
Well, you're also bringing in crowd participation
at the end.
Ending.
And it's not
correct. I used to do my Chicago Med joke at the end.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it was a crowd. It was like improv, and I had kind of an ending. And I remember a headliner was like, you don't do that at the end. He goes, I don't care if you do it for me, but I know if you do that for so-and-so, they're going to.
And I'm glad I learned it early, because if Jim didn't tell me, I would have been like, I might have been on an important, bigger show and been like grinding on something like, what the fuck? Yeah. What are you doing?
I always ask if like I work with certain headliners. I'm like, hey, can I do this? They're like, yeah, go ahead. That's fine.
Yeah. You always ask, and you also research them a little bit to be like, is this going to kind of overstep or whatever? But I just didn't know. I was like, this is my best stuff. I'm trying to kill.
Like I'm going to do a leg of shows with someone else now. And remember, I don't have to, they're already sold out shows. I just show up. It's like so great. After I just released my special, I've been doing all these headline gigs where I'm freaking out about draw and promoting it every fucking day, where people are getting pissed on social media. I forget that last time I did this run, I hated this like 2 of the shows because they fucking hated me, because
they're not your people. Yeah,
you're not him.
Yeah, they're waiting for the person they came to see, right? Yeah. The person, but also, even if you get 20 people who come to your headlining show, those 20 people maybe, and you don't always get lucky like this, but maybe those 20 people truly looked you up, or knew who you were. So you'll take 20 people who are there to see you over 100 who are not sometimes.
Yes and no. Yeah.
Yeah. Not all the time, but sometimes you can be like, That's why you sometimes do the shows of like the Saturday late or whatever it is, and you're like, that was so fun. It was like half full, but why was that so fun? And you're like, oh, these were actual fans. Like I just did on Monday at Comedy Bar. Here's a great example. Sold out pretty much. It was great, packed. So I walked in, but I could feel just by doing it long enough.
Every time I've done it, it's not been sold out. What the fuck?
They can't have two host people energy up there, but I can feel in the room that I'm like, it's sold out, but there's something. It feels like divided in a way, and I just knew some like the comedy instinct in me knew. Apparently, like half the not even exaggerating, half the room was there to see one guy doing 3 minutes. So on the mic, so for the whole show, it's like a little muted, and everyone, including me, and I was aware of it. I addressed it a little bit at the top, and I was doing more crowd work. I wasn't really doing bits, but as soon as I started doing material, they were like it was real clear that they were like, we're not really gonna laugh until this person gets up.
Oh,
and every comic was like getting, because you're like weirded out by you. Like, this is a full room. It should be hot. I should be doing well.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting. I'm like, oh, this is what happens when people are here to see somebody else.
Yeah.
You know?
Even if it's not someone famous.
Not someone famous,
right.
just for one guy. And I mean, you know, that room, it's small enough where like that's, and then the other side is looking at that like, are we being weird? Like now we're all, so it's a whole.
Well, that
whole
happened
thing.
when they were doing that Make-A-Wish thing at Zany's where they were letting people.
I just experienced that on one of those
And
Wednesdays.
everybody came for one comic and he didn't do well. But the whole show was just like
weird
vibes, and
I went up right before the guy, and it's
better to go before than after.
It's better to go before, but what he's talking about is Zany's did this thing where you could pay and you get a coach, like you get assigned like a veteran comedian who would coach you, and you do 5 to 7 minutes on a real Zany show. So again, pulled in on a Wednesday, it's packed. And but the audience, I'm like, there's a lot of older. I'm like, who is this? This is all here for this guy, and people are doing it was a bad show. They were like, it was rough. People didn't know. They didn't explain it. I don't know why the host didn't tell people what was happening. Same at my
show too. Yeah.
So I'm like, the reason there's a lot of 80-year-old people here is because, and I just fully, and I was like, but then I started doing well because I'm like, no, we appreciate you coming. Of course we do. But at the same time, the rest of the comics, we hate this.
Yeah.
And I was like, I
addressed it.
I addressed it. And then I was able to have a set. I'm glad I did it that way, but that also doesn't always work.
Let's talk about after the shows now. What are you doing? Because I know you're not a big partier now. And I know you have a girlfriend now, but like, what were you doing before, after the shows? Let's say you're in fucking Detroit, you do a show. What do you do?
Yeah.
You're not going to bed.
I'm very much like, it depends. Like you're saying now, right?
Well, like,
then and now. I mean, I wasn't even a partier then, but I would still like, when you're going on the road and you're like newer, it's exciting. You're like, oh, but then when you're doing it week over week, you're like, this is also tiring. Mm-hmm. You're not like I pick one day of a weekend if I'm going out to like do something after the show. One day. So if I'm there from Thursday through Saturday, I'm really realistically only going to do something on like Saturday or Friday.
And what is due? Like visit
after the shows? I might be like, that might be go get a drink or something.
Okay.
Or like, you know, go like do something like that. But it's never like go to a club ever.
But you're not like, do you ever go back to your hotel room and like write, or do you just?
No, I mean sometimes I'll go back and like do some like work, like you know, emails, like because you have because you're like emails, because you're already awake and you need to come down somehow. But typically, I will literally just be like, all right, I got to do, I'll go get like a drink, or like I'll, you know, sit at the club and have a drink sometimes. But it's very rarely like I have a big plan. You know, it's honestly, when I go on the road with my girlfriend, sometimes we'll try to pick up a spot to go eat or something because it's like more fun. But if I'm by myself, I'm like, I already picked out the place, I'm getting food. I'm going to take it back to the hotel and just watch something. And
you're a food guy, right?
I'm a big food guy, big food and drink
So what
guy.
are you doing after shows where like you're in a city where everything closes at 10 and the shows?
So I just did the Jukebox in Peoria.
Yes.
Which is, if you're not familiar with Peoria, it's like everything closes before the show begins. You know, it's like it's real old. But what we did is we had one place where like this place is open till 10 and the show ends at like 9:30. It says 10. So we called them before. We told them the situation, and it was a very cool, like,
that's very responsible.
Minor showbiz moment where so my girlfriend is featured. She leaves, takes the car, goes there, gets there at 9:50. I get off stage like 10:05. I then get dropped off at the restaurant 10:15, and they have fully closed, but there's still a few people still in there.
Sweet.
And they had the meal ready. She
that's
ordered.
Perfect. Yeah.
So
yeah.
And it felt really cool because they're like, oh, like we love comedy. Like it was incredible. I'm like,
that's
this is
awesome.
in Peoria.
Yeah.
So I had like a steak at like 10:30,
awesome.
and I was like, if I could do this every show,
which you can't. So
but
what do you do when you're not in Peoria getting
then
steak
then you
service?
go shittier, and you go. But the problem
You don't
is,
strike me as a guy that goes to McDonald's a lot.
not a lot, but when you're on the road, sometimes you have no option, right? And you need to eat. I try to also, if it's a town like that, I eat like before the show. Every city, I feel like if I go somewhere, I'll always ask, like, what's a cool bar? What's a cool restaurant? And usually people now know. Like, I have people come and bring me bottles of whiskey at shows. Like, it's that because I talk about it enough. But I like that stuff, like where it's like I can't find it here,
right?
You know, so I try to do stuff like that. But I mean, honestly, it's not as exciting. Like, I'm not doing crazy shit.
Well, how much of a night owl are like? What time are you going to bed nowadays? Like
now, it's like usually between 12 and like 2.
Okay,
maybe 12 and 1. I'd say. I mean, if I'm here, 12 and 1. If I'm on the road, it might be a little later, just because like you're out later doing shit. But if it's like 12 and 1, and sometimes I'll go home like now. I just feel like sometimes you just feel on, and you're like, I need to get this energy out. Then I'll maybe go and I'll go write for a little bit, or I'll do something. But a lot of times I'll go home and I feel like I go home, I immediately want to eat. Yeah. Like that is my comfort.
That's what I do too.
I need to just eat. And then sometimes I'm like, that was completely unnecessary. I need to do, and then we go to sleep because you're like, well, fuck else. So it's not great, but that's our life. Like we don't get dinner time. We get after shows or before shows.
Yeah, of course. I always look when the hotel to see if they have a gym because I love to just work out after a show.
After the show.
It's kind of crazy, but
so I do that sometimes because I'm every day I usually work out, but I will do it. Tom Segura said this. He's like, I get to a show or get to a gig, the first thing I do is work out. So I finish it. Because how many times have you gotten into a town at like 4 o'clock and you're like, oh, the show's at 7.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I could just like eat and fuck around, or I could just finish it. I'm more prone to finish it.
That's a good idea.
And I do that during the days too. Like I wake up, I usually eat, and then I work out a couple hours later. So I just finish it by like 1 or 2.
What about when you started comedy? You were going out after your shows and partying and what?
A little bit, but it was more of like we would only have our show, so it was a big deal because it'd be like, you know, we'd be me and Tyler. That's when Tyler used to drink. So it was like Fowler used to drink. So we'd have like all of our friends. We'd go. It would be like a normal night of like your college friends. You just go out.
And when you were a kid, were you a night owl too? Like when you were in college?
I would say,
school?
yeah. I would say, yeah. I mean, I always gravitated towards it. I think I only woke up when I like for work. I had to wake up, but I would try a few times. I tried to transition fully when I was like working 9 to 5. That I'm like, let me wake up at 6, work out, then go to work, and then by like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're like,
exhausted.
I'm dead.
Yeah.
And then you get home and you're just like, now I don't have energy to do anything fun.
Yeah.
I used all my good energy on bullshit.
Yeah.
Where I got paid to work, but I was like, this sucks. I want to like have energy for fun shit. And then I started wasting company time, started working out in lunch, and I was like, oh, this is how to do it. This is now I unlocked this
Beat
method.
The man at their game.
Oh, it was so great. That was my favorite.
In high school, you grew up in Naperville?
Naperville,
right?
yeah.
So what were you like in high school though? Were you like a nerdy kid?
It was weird. I would consider myself a little nerdy, but I was lucky because the school system I went to, we all grew up from elementary school all the way through high school.
Okay.
So what that means is even though I wasn't always as nerdy, I used to be like, when I was young, I was like skinny and fit. Then I got like a little fat and nerdy. But when I was fat and nerdy, I still had all the friends from that.
Before.
So I never changed like social class, which was amazing because I think if I started and I just like went to a new school or something and they caught that version, they'd be like, what the fuck is this? Who's this nerd? So I was like, I got grandfathered into kind of like a popular crowd.
Were you creative? I feel like you were you sports?
We were creative. So my brother is actually, he's a doctor, but he's very funny, but he's funny in like a dark, like it's like funny like how comics are funny, where it's like, it's a little too far. Like you can't really say it on stage, but you can say it.
Sure.
Like, he's that funny, but he does it in public. So it's funny to us.
Yeah.
But he doesn't care because he's a doctor. He's like, yeah, I make more money than
do?
all you. Fuck you.
Me?
Yeah, you have to. You need me. I'm relevant to society. So he's got a very savage sense of humor. So we would like do creative things. Like we'd make little videos. We used to have this whole series. We'd make videos, and I forget about like we're so like inundated with ticket sales, fucking movie clips that you forget like. We were doing cool just for fun. And we had all these videos we used to make with like camcorders like back in the day. We used to edit like shit. So I think when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, I did start these roots earlier than I thought.
Yeah. To go into comedy, you have to have some fucking darkness.
Yes.
And you had a normal childhood.
Well, here's the thing. No, so the darkness came from, so like I mentioned, I I was a very skinny, healthy kid. I was very active. Then I hit puberty late. So when everyone was like in 6th, 7th, 8th grade, kind of growing up, features were defining, I still looked like a middle school kid.
Yeah, I was tiny too.
I was tiny, but then I was gaining weight, but I wasn't growing. So I just had like baby fat, like a very smooth baby face, and so but I was very like I was still likable enough, and I became like everyone's gay best friend. Like that was my role. So I never like felt it, but then I could see people. I'm like, it's different than me. And
you
then
were the friend to all the girls.
And I was the friend to all the girls, so it helped me like socially in a sense, but I also wasn't dating. I wasn't doing that. I was just like, people thought I think I was, but I was like, no, I don't. I just talk to these women about their boyfriend problems. I was like, I was just that guy. High school, I was like, I gotta like change my life. I can't. I don't enter another 4 years of this kind of similar thing. So I joined cross country, and that gave me two things. It gave me discipline because I was never disciplined really before that. I was like just doing whatever I wanted. And then that gave me this discipline, which I think carried into stand-up, that kind of like everyday kind of thing. But it also like I hit cross country, I lost a bunch of weight, but I also hit puberty. So I dramatically changed. I grew like 4 inches, and I also just lost a bunch of weight. Like my voice changed. So I looked like in a couple of years, like you look at the photos, you're like, this is a different person. But then I got so obsessed with that new image of who I was that I had like a minor, I would consider it like an eating disorder for like 6 months. I gave it to myself. I was like, oh man, I look great. But I look crazy. If I look at photos of it, I was like 130 pounds, like 5'11". Yeah. Which is now I'm like 180.
Okay.
And same height.
Yeah.
So like 5'11 and a half maybe. But can you imagine like how skinny that is?
Skinny as fuck.
But I was like, man, I look great. Like I had this perception. So there's some dysmorphia there. And then I don't know what happened, but I think it just clicked like a year or so after doing that I was like, this is wrong. But I don't know what the turning point was. But there's that period of like real weird depression, but I was also like repressing it. And I think I just never addressed it, and I started doing stand-up. I think that's what happened.
That's your outlet?
Yeah.
Were you like drinking and partying in high school?
Not in high school. Our high school that happened, but it wasn't like a huge, it was like kind of like those people did it, but they weren't pressuring you. It wasn't like you had to be in the scene. It was a big enough school where you could kind of exist without being in it. And college, I was in a relationship going into freshman year of college, so I was kind of just like doing the same thing. We met in high school, so we didn't really change our behavior when we went to college. I went through a breakup like end of freshman year. So then summer was just bleak. I started doing weird, like I got a tattoo. I started barefoot running.
You have a tattoo?
I have 2 tattoos.
Dear God, what are they of?
One is when I was like we got like a tribal wolf. I was like, this is my spirit animal, some fucking shit. And then the second one is actually a running one. That's more meaningful. That one's actually a good one. But
just do it.
Yeah, I just copied all the slogans of people. Lance Armstrong, like on my.
You're just like a race car with all the slogans. Yeah.
Summer was real bleak, so that was another period of like I was trying to find something to do because I was like, I don't know who I am really. I'm just kind of like I was just kind of doing the motions. Yeah. Then I joined this in DePaul. They have these like there's social frats, there's business frats, but DePaul is like there's no campus housing really. There's like some, but so I joined this frat. I started going out, started like partying a little bit more, and that really turned because I didn't like open myself up to other people that weren't like in my circle. So I found this whole new kind of like lane, I guess, and it was like fun. And I was like, oh, this is cool. So I was that person for a few years, but I was like, I'm not like really a party guy. Like I would drink, I would have fun, but
I just feel like you never would lose control. You seem like you're always in control of the situation.
Well, it was weird
never,
because
like, drunk at a bar at 4 a.m.
Only a few times I got real bad, and I would drink like I could not imagine that I would drink a lot, but I would always like know when I'm like one more drink, I'm about to black out here. So like let's either stop this or if we do black out, like make sure I'm in a place where I can do it. Sure. You know. And it's also like
planning ahead, just like the meal in Peoria.
Yeah, and it's also like when you're younger like that, you can bounce back like quick, and and I just had so much more energy. I would come home after being out and like work out. I would do what you do after shows. How many comics are on here? Like you're like, what do you do when you go home? They're like, I just jerk off. I don't know. I feel like this podcast could be 30 seconds long.
When I'm dating someone, I just have sex with her, or I just jerk off. Yeah, that's the honestly.
Yeah, that's honestly are you up? Do that. That's what it should be called.
Well, I'm keeping that in.
Yeah, that's the promo for the podcast. The rest was very technical, but I feel like we ended on a high note, you know?
Where can people find out more about you and your upcoming shows, Vic?
At Vik Pandya on all social media, VikPandya. I have a bunch of specials out, bunch of touring dates coming up, so check me out.
All right. Well, thanks, Vic, for doing the podcast. I really appreciate it. Go check him out. Go to sleep.